So to finish off the night, we thought it was appropriate to talk about actual use cases for the Ethereum blockchain in the cybersecurity industry. And here tonight we have Paul Makowski, a security researcher like many of you in the room tonight, talking about an application that they are currently building that uses the Ethereum blockchain for threat intelligence, antivirus, and other related topics. So I wanted to go through this for all of you, invited them down, and now Paul will tell you a little bit about how this might work and what the future might hold for the cybersecurity industry and products that are used in it when you mix the Ethereum blockchain into it. So take it away.
All right, thank you, Dan. And thank you for everyone sticking around. I know I'm between you and beer, more beer. I guess we ran out, but more beer. So I appreciate that. So my background, I know a lot of you here, my background is in information security. I also work for a company called NARF Industries. Some of you may know me, know of my work. If you played around with DARPA's Cyber Grand Challenge, yep, okay, cool. I wrote, as well as my colleagues and Jordan over here as well, a lot of us wrote a lot of the binaries. So if you had problems with some of the binaries, that may or may not have been my fault. So yeah, that's NARF Industries. Another thing on the NARF Industries front, we were sponsored by the Department of Homeland Security recently to conduct pretty fundamental research into how do you do confidentiality in a blockchain environment, which is kind of they're in conflict there. So we were playing around with different things. More people are talking about it now, but we completed this project a while ago. I think close to a year ago, we were playing around with the concept of using SGX for keeping things private, but also agreeable in a blockchain environment. So anyway, that's great. That's on the NARF industry side. PolySwarm is basically a spinoff of NARF Industries. It's owned by the same people and the same people working there. And I've been couching this as kind of like my nights and weekends project, and NARF is my daytime job. This has definitely become full time, and I hope soon to get back to the actual hacking things. But one thing that I've found interesting lately is the confluence of blockchain and information security are smart contract vulnerabilities. So I've also given presentations on smart contract vulnerabilities. Happy to speak about that with anybody after this talk. But so anyway, today I'm talking about PolySwarm, and what PolySwarm is basically an effort to try to fix the market dynamics behind antivirus and threat intelligence in general. So I've hacked on a lot of things in the past, and right now I'm trying to hack on economic models. So there's your intro. Oh no. Okay, here we go. So what's this have to do with kidneys? So a lot of people need kidneys, and in most countries in the world, you can't legally buy a kidney. So this is difficult. So how do you get the most kidneys to the people that need them in a timely manner? And you might notice there's a asterisk there. A notable exception is Iran. It's actually legal to sell your kidneys in Iran. And if you Wikipedia that, there's people spray paint advertisements for their kidneys on the sides of hospitals. So anyway, so this is a good thing in general, that you can't sell. Well, you can't buy and you can't sell a kidney. But that law doesn't remove the need for efficiently distributing kidneys to people who require them in order to stay alive. So what do you do? And this is going back to, okay. So before I get to that, so what do you do? So the reason why I'm talking about kidneys at all is there's a great book by Alvin Roth, who's an economist that's recently been involved in designing markets. And he came up with the kidney exchange program that allowed a bunch of people to live that would have otherwise not lived. And so he designed a kidney market with the constraint that no money was changing hands. So anyway, that is called market design. Boom. That took me like 10 minutes to make. So anyway, here's a graph that everyone should like because it goes right and up and to the right. But what you're seeing here is this is a graph of the percentage of live donor transplants in the U.S. Yep. Okay, it's on the chart. So Alvin started his work in 2003, and basically prior to this market design, the best that you could do in terms of having either you have an altruistic donor that just gives a kidney to somebody else, or you have basically two pairs of people. So a husband and wife, for example. One of them has a viable kidney, but it wouldn't work for the spouse. And then you have another pair that one of them has a viable kidney and wouldn't work for their spouse. So you do a simultaneous transplant. And the problem is this doesn't scale. Legally, you can't bind somebody to trade their kidney in a manner that they can't later back out of. So the best anyone could do prior to designing a proper market was there were some hospitals somewhere in New England that did a 6-person operation, and it only scaled to the size of the OR and the number of doctors in the OR, right? So anyway, because the problem again is one of them could go under, and then the other person that hadn't gone under yet could change their mind about donating their kidney, and that would be bad. So anyway, that speaks to this problem of trust. So people need to trust the market. In the simultaneous swap scenario, both donors go under at the same time, so they can't legally come out and de-consent to the transfer of kidneys. So boom, solve that problem, kind of, but it doesn't scale. So in general, you need a market that people can trust in, and that scales. So blockchain promises a lot. One thing that people have been throwing around is a trustless, and I would kind of agree to a certain extent, but not fully. And the reason is, you don't have to really trust the peers necessarily, or more specifically, you should probably trust that everyone is looking out for their best interests. That's a form of trust. But you do have to trust the design, right? So, Bitcoin is successful. Blockchain projects in general are successful because the economics behind it make sense. So another problem, okay, we're off the kidney topic. Another problem is today's threat intelligence market. And I'll tell you why that's a problem in a minute. So our thought after having read Alvin Roth's book is, what if you could literally program a better way for participants on either side of a market to interact in a way that produced better solutions? In the case of the kidney market, more lives are saved. In the case of the threat intelligence market, what if you could cover more of the threat landscape? So Ethereum sounds interesting for this because Ethereum supports smart contracts, and smart contracts are literally code that handle money. So that seems like a good basis. So what's this? Imagine the black rectangle is all of the malware that an enterprise might face. And this is definitely a public domain image that I just took off Wikipedia. The rationale there is it's not creative enough to have any copyright assigned to it. So great. So the black is all of the malware that an enterprise might face. And the two circles are two different antivirus products, for example. Now, in reality, and so they cover some portion of this space. In reality, those circles would overlap a lot more. So who here, I mean, kind of silly, but who didn't hear about WannaCry, I guess? So if you're an antivirus company and you're not detecting WannaCry, it's real easy to just write you off, right? Unfortunately, on the back end, what that incentivizes is a lot of companies doing duplicated work to detect the same stuff. And sometimes they share signatures, but a lot of times they don't. The general rule is there's duplicated talent employed to do the same job, which is duplicated costs. And that's one of the reasons why I think today's market leaves a little bit to be desired. Another reason is it's very difficult to make the argument as an antivirus or other threat intelligence company that, hey, I detect this really cool strain of malware, and by the way, you're also going to get hit with this really cool strain of malware. That's a really difficult sales argument to make. So it's really difficult to invest in exploring niche or specialized malware strains. The incentive's simply not there. So what you're left with is large, mostly concentric circles. But what you like is more of that black covered. And so anyway, here's if you only have, and the third problem with today's market is they're not interoperable. I don't think anyone would take offense to me saying you can't run both McAfee and Symantec. Not that you'd want to, but you can't. That's not technically possible. So you can't. You have to choose one of these two circles. You're one or the other. And you can actually never get to this part. This is actually better than you can do. So what we'd like to do is build so visually, this is what we hope for tomorrow's threat intelligence market to look like, is security experts around the world can crowdsource their expertise by developing micro engines. And we hope that thousands of micro engines will participate in this new market they cover a smaller space. Each of them cover a smaller space. But together, when you query the market at large, we'll have better coverage than what's offered today. And will incentivize security experts to look at specialized threats. So how's that work? Okay, so we have several economic instruments, and these instruments are implemented in Ethereum smart contracts. And by the way, we've also released code. So if you go to github.com/PolySwarm, our alpha smart contracts are out there, as well as, and I'll get back to this, as well as a Golang distributed app development framework. So if you prefer Go over JavaScript, which you should, you can use that over the equivalent is Truffle. Anyway, back to this. So in this market, we have enterprises and end users that have suspect files and URLs, and they want to ask in a crowdsourced manner whether or not those things are malicious. So what they do is they pay a familiar subscription fee to a class of participants called ambassadors, and these ambassadors will interact with the market on their behalf, posting specific artifacts, files, URLs, etc., as transactions to a PolySwarm bounty contract that lives on the Ethereum blockchain. Security experts around the world can see the fact that an artifact has been swarmed, quote unquote, trademark. And if that's a type of file that they think they have some insight into, then they can take a look and then basically assert whether or not they think that file is malicious or benign. At this part, it turns into a little bit like a twist on a prediction market. So who here has heard of Augur, an Ethereum project? Okay, yeah, a bunch of people. Okay, so Augur is a very vanilla sort of prediction market that lives on the Ethereum blockchain, and they're interested in answering questions like who's going to win the World Cup next, for example. They're interested in facts, in predicting facts that everyone can then later observe. We have a slightly harder problem, and this is why it's a twist on it. We're trying to predict, in a sense, whether or not a file or a URL is malicious, which will always require expertise. It's never universally observable. So anyway, I can get back to that. But so you have three security experts on the right in this diagram. The one at the top is going to say, hey, I think this file is malicious. And I think it's malicious to the tune of like 10 nectar. And nectar is the name of our token. And so they send, what'd I do? Okay, so they send an assertion into the bounty that says, I think this thing is malicious to the tune of 10 nectar. This bounty input is then sent back to the ambassador, who weighs all these security experts' assertions and comes to a verdict for their customer saying, hey, this thing is probably malicious or this thing's probably benign. And all of this process is automated. The security expert is authoring a micro engine, which is basically like a miniature antivirus that focuses specifically on the type of file and type of threats that they detect. I'm going to hand wave here real quick, but ground truth comes in later. That's a whole complex topic. And the security expert who got it right, let's say that file actually was malicious. This security expert had said it was benign. They both paid in Nectar to the escrowed Nectar into the bounty contract. And because the file was actually malicious, the escrowed Nectar from the security expert who was incorrect was sent to the security expert who was correct. So it's redistributing Nectar from incorrect experts to correct experts. So it's a feedback function that rewards accuracy. So it behooves these security experts to fine tune their micro engines to be best at detecting things as they come up. Further, and another thing here, although it's not depicted on this diagram, is if there were two security experts that got it right, the payout is going to be split among them. So it also incentivizes security experts to have unique insight into the malintent of specific files. And that's what that larger coverage of that Venn diagram is all about. You're going to seek out files that you think you can uniquely identify as malicious or benign. Anyway, so today's threat protection economy is broken. We don't think it's a failure of any one particular player in the space. Again, we think it's kind of a market design problem. And so we're trying to build a better way for participants to interact. And we're doing that with Ethereum smart contracts. PolySwarm won't be in the middle of this Nectar changing hands at all, but we will be developing the smart contracts. Just a few stats on today's market. The closest thing to a centralized equivalent of what we're building is VirusTotal. Who here is familiar with VirusTotal? Okay, everyone. Yeah, all right. So based on private conversations, this is actually kind of on the low end. So VirusTotal charges, and this is in euro, not dollars. That's a typo. On the low end, it's about 160,000 euro per month for a private API subscription to VirusTotal. And if you're an antivirus player and you're not on the subscription, you're going to fall behind. You're not going to get all the latest files, et cetera. So it's kind of a necessary evil. And a lot of players in the space don't really like the fact that VirusTotal, aka Google, because Google bought them, is just man in the middling all of their intelligence and charging them to sell it back to them. VirusTotal processes about 10 million scans a day. Estimated, this is the price of the sample, 0.01 cents. We think we can do better, particularly by just eliminating a middleman. So our plan is we're going to hold a token sale, and I'm happy to talk about recent developments on that front offline. But in February, and what that would fund is actually bringing these contracts to maturity, but to a larger extent, actually building the community around using this sort of thing. So I expect to be talking at a lot more meetups like this. And unlike a lot of projects in this space, unfortunately, we're actually publishing code. So we're a legitimate team that's legitimately publishing code. So you might be asking yourself, what's up on the screen right now? That's the least gross picture of Paragord, which is a type of truffle that I could find on Shutterstock. And my budget was $10, so you're welcome. Yeah, so we're publishing code now. We published Paragord a month ago or so. I've actually gotten pull requests on it. What Paragord is it's the Golang equivalent of truffle. So if you want to go build Ethereum distributed applications in Go, check it out. It's on github.com/polyswarm/Paragord. And also, importantly, because this is a utility offering, all of the tokens will be usable on day one, so you can follow the progress of our smart contract development right now on GitHub. And nobody's buying anything for some future thing. They'll be usable right when they're sold. So the team, you'll recognize at least one of them, hopefully more than one. So these are some of our advisors, and thank you, Dan, again for the kind intro and the opportunity to talk. And we just got a new one. Again, that took me like 10 minutes that call out. But the former CIO of McAfee is going to help us get some more connections, et cetera. And on the McAfee front, they actually published a blog post that mentioned us in a bullish manner. So that's pretty cool. We've also been speaking with Symantec. We hope the existing players will play in this market, and that space there's sufficient space for new players to come in as well. Here's us. These pictures look painful. Whoever's the guy taking our photos shine the light so bright that I was literally crying. So anyway, here's some links. Yeah, you don't really care so much about us. The advisors, they're more interesting. Okay, so here's some links. For whatever reason, the token sales space likes Telegram. Gross. But please join our Telegram. I didn't. Yeah. Website white paper. If you do happen to go and check it out, I wrote the white paper, so blame me if there's problems with it. And we have a Twitter, and check out our source code. And happy to answer questions about PolySwarm or smart contract security. Thank you guys for coming and sticking around. And yeah.
I saw you raise your hand first.
Yep.
So I'm sure this is something you've thought about, but if your system rewards people for identifying shady code as actually being malicious, does that incentivize people to release lots and lots of shady code because they'll personally have lots of insight into it?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's one of the first things we thought of. So the reason, the way that we disincentivize that behavior is through a series of fees. Those fees don't go to us. They actually go in proportion to the most active ambassadors on the market at any given time. Kind of an interesting discussion there, but in a sense, it's less than a zero sum for both introducing, because you have to pay a fee to introduce an artifact into the network. You also have to pay a fee to assert on that artifact. That you should never be able to outpace the rate of the fees being imposed. But that's an excellent question, and that's not something I covered in this, but yeah, great question. Okay, I think, yeah, right here, okay.
So how do you handle consensus, and especially false positives? If you think about VirusTotal, this is lots of crap on VirusTotal. People would say, like, especially I deal with domains, and google.de was reported as malware for a while. So would you reward that? How do you deal with false positives?
Another great question. So that was the one that I explicitly said I hand waved on. Yeah, so that's the ground truth thing. And I'll touch on it real quick here. Okay, so in the top, you have a class of participants called arbiters. And what arbiters are, and they're defined by another smart contract, that in a sliding window fashion, whichever ambassadors are in the top X percent, we haven't fixed this percent, let's just say 5%, in terms of introducing nectar into the ecosystem through the placement of bounties. So the most active ambassadors at any given time are considered by smart contracts to be arbiters. And arbiters are responsible and rewarded for voting on the actual malintent of a file or a URL, et cetera. So the reason why we designed it that way is ambassadors, by their very nature, should have the expertise to determine that. The reason why they might do this honestly, the reason why we hope they do it honestly, is because they have the most to lose by a market that turns sour, in the sense that if they so mistrust in the validity of the ground truth, because they have the most on the line at any given time, then they have the most to lose. So that's so it's delegating this ground truth determination to a subset of participants. But we've designed that subset such that their economic incentives should be aligned with the overall health of the market. And they should have the expertise to actually determine ground truth. Happy to chat more on that. That's actually the topic of my most recent blog post I call it mediated consensus. I think it might be applicable to other market design as well. It's probably not novel, but I don't read enough economic papers, I suppose. But anyway, yeah, that's my 2 cents on that for now.
We'll allow one more.
How many lines?
I'd have to check. We just pushed more today. I mean, on the order of dozens. I mean, like, yeah, I mean, we're trying to keep it as simple as possible. And this is what we have published right now is a proof of concept end-to-end bounty contract. One aspect I haven't discussed at all is offers. So that's a totally different topic. In short, what an offer is if an ambassador knows which security experts they want to contract with, they can set up a Raiden channel. Who's familiar with Raiden? Okay, a few people. So it's basically the Lightning equivalent on Ethereum. They can set up a Raiden channel to more quickly transact over that. So that will certainly be more complicated as well. That should be a lot more complicated than the bounty. Honestly, I'd have to I mean, okay, dozens is probably a little too small, but on the order of hundreds. But we're also, one of the great things working with Trail Bits is we're going to have a lot of expertise helping us out and making sure that we're not doing it wrong.
Less code is less bugs.
Totally agree.